Okay, American federal government, you've made it. This is the last chapter, and then next week you have the final exam. If you're not working ahead, some of you might be watching this and working ahead a little bit. But finals week is like the second week in May or so, and that's when you'll have the exam, and that is it. I had to choose because we ran out of time. We had two chapters left, one on domestic policy and one on foreign policy. I wish we could have done them both because they're both so important, and ideas surrounding domestic policy is really important. But you'll have to cover that on your own, research on your own from good sources about different domestic policies, ideas about the economy, supply side economics, or what's called, what used to be called Reaganomics, or Keynesian economics. That's more the Democratic viewpoint. But we've kind of addressed some of those issues when we talked about political parties and stuff like that. Excuse me. So today, I'm going to focus on foreign policy, and that's the last chapter we're covering. The reason I chose this is because we have some huge developments in foreign affairs that are potentially hugely consequential for the future, for your life, for mine, but especially yours, because you'll probably be around a lot longer than I will be. And so I thought this is a good time to go ahead and take a deeper dive into that. Some of the things to consider as you watch the video and that I have for you this week, and as you study and read about this chapter. First of all, foreign policy is not easy. It's complex, it's difficult. I often hear things where people, especially students, but adults too, be like, well, we just need to bomb the heck out of them, and they think there's easy solutions. And I can promise you, if there's an easy solution to these problems, they would have done it by now. It is so complex, and there's so many different interweaving things going on that makes it extremely difficult. As you read about it, first of all, the president is in charge of foreign policy because we need a unified voice. We cannot have 535 members of Congress negotiating with foreign countries and everything like that. So it's principal responsibility of the president, and then the Secretary of State, who today is Antony Blinken. That's their primary job, is to negotiate in foreign affairs with foreign countries. And it's a huge job. And we have diplomats, of course, with every country throughout the world. And it's delicate and very, very difficult. The president, as we learned in the other chapter, can sign executive agreements, but it is up to the Senate to approve treaties with foreign countries. And after World War I, the Senate refused to sign on to the League of Nations, the Treaty of Versailles. And we went into a period known as isolationism, especially in the 1930s, prior to World War II. And then more recently, the Senate never ratified the Paris Climate Accords as an example that Obama had negotiated. Even though all the other countries of the world had signed on to that. But anyways, it's just an example of that. And it's only Congress that officially can declare war. The president can't declare war. That was seen as being far too much power for one person to have, but the president can commit troops. And after Vietnam, they passed what's called the War Powers Act, and saying, okay, if the president commits troops, he's got to get permission from Congress, but that's not really been followed. So there's those issues, but those issues are more to do with the structure of government in the Constitution. The last thing then I want you to really focus on then is, what is the role of the United States in world affairs? We have seen a return to isolationism. That was popular in the 1930s. It did not end well for the isolationists because Hitler took over all of Europe, and that ended up being a huge mistake. And after Pearl Harbor, and after Hitler, then we take a leading role in the world for democracy and for freedom, and that really became the viewpoint of really Republicans and Democrats, that the United States should take that role. And we created, of course, NATO to oppose the Soviet Union, and we were seen, as, although during the Cold War often we backed ruthless dictators and things like that, but at least we saw ourselves, and other countries saw the United States as a leader for that, for democracy. And that's what NATO is. It's a defensive organization to defend democracy. And at the end of the Cold War, NATO had expanded to countries formerly behind the Iron Curtain: Poland, Czech Republic, and Romania, and so forth. And then it even had Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia. Those are the Baltic states that used to be a part of the Soviet Union. They became democracies, and so we're like, okay, well, come join the club since you're a democracy. An attack against one is an attack against all. We will defend each other. We will defend democracy. Vladimir Putin was greatly concerned that Ukraine might join NATO because it had become a democracy as well and was moving closer and closer to the West and closer in that direction. And so Vladimir Putin, beginning, when he first came to power, had actually sought to expand Russian aggression in places like what used to be Soviet Georgia and Azerbaijan, and there was a war there. And then he took Crimea in 2014 while Obama was president. Though there were sanctions issued and condemnation, nothing was done, and the Ukrainians couldn't really do anything against the taking of the Crimea, which was a part of Ukraine, the Crimea Peninsula. And then as you know, 2 years ago, we started to see Putin and the Russians amass an army, and we warned. And usually we don't do that. We usually kind of keep that to ourselves, but the strategy of the United States was, no, we're going to warn the world. Russia's about to invade Ukraine. And Putin and Russia was like, no, we're not. And we're like, you don't assemble hundreds of thousands of troops and all those tanks unless you're ready to invade. And sure enough, then he invaded. It is the first major war in Europe since the end of World War II, sadly. And potentially still, that war, wars have uncertain outcomes, and we have no idea how that's going to go. As I talk to you over the weekend, Congress finally, belatedly, approved another $70 billion aid package to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. We saw isolationists in Congress, and these were the most extreme Republicans that had opposed that. And they are isolationist. America First, they claim, which ironically was the same organization that opposed getting involved and trying to help Britain in democracy against Hitler. But they held that up in Congress. But a vast majority of Democrats and Republicans agreed. And so that's how they got the legislation passed. They managed to overwhelm that. And now the Speaker of the House, he may lose his job over it because there's a clause within the Republican Party that one member can force a vote on the speakership. We'll see what happens with that this week. But we do see some of these same themes and these same trends where there's a significant number of Americans who do believe that we should not be involved in foreign affairs. We need to just America first and not give aid or help to these other countries. But as evident by the passage of that recent aid package, most Americans do believe that we have some role to play there to stop aggression from countries like Russia and China, because China could take Taiwan, in order to help defend democracy. It's a global world, that's for sure. That's an important thing to understand, that events are not just limited here, but events definitely have huge impact throughout the world. And then most recently on October 7th, you saw the Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel, and then the war in Gaza that has resulted. And that too, of course, could be very destabilizing, because last week, and I'm almost 10 minutes, but I'm going to go over a little bit here. But last week, the Israeli government had bombed an embassy in Damascus, Syria, an Iranian embassy. If you notice, the Iranians responded with a drone and missile attack against Israel. The Iron Dome, I think that it's called, protected that. Nothing, no damage was done, but that was the first time Iran had attacked Israel. Israel responded with an attack against Iran, though it was, most people are like, okay, that was a pretty limited response, because we're really concerned that then Israel and Iran could go to war. Syria could jump in this. Putin has backed Syria. This thing could blow up, just like the Ukrainian thing could blow up. We've had, finally, I'll end on this note, since the end of World War II and the United Nations was created, and I think a lot of credit goes to NATO too, the United Nations, the International Peace Organization, we've not had a world war. That's a good thing, right? Especially in a nuclear era when we have the ability to destroy all human life on Earth. I think that's a very good thing not to have another world war. And I think the United Nations has played a huge role in helping to prevent this. And in some ways, NATO has too, because I think, Putin understands if he were to attack Poland or Lithuania, that everybody is going to come in on that. And so I think that has been a force for peace. But these situations are unprecedented, especially the war in Ukraine, but to some extent Israel as well. And let's hope that wiser heads prevail. Let's hope that we can avoid conflict that spreads beyond what's happening now. But of course, as your American federal government instructor, I do believe strongly in democracy and freedom and individual rights. And these are things that Putin and China and Iran oppose. And so so in other words, the Cold War, we thought it was over. It's not over. It continues today. So that's what you'll be learning about. The video is called Putin and the Presidents. And it's a fascinating look because in many ways, Putin has played just about every president that's been there in order to get his way. But Putin did not anticipate the Ukrainians kicking their butt, which is what they did in the first part of this war. But now Putin's playing the long game. The longer the war goes on, the more it favors him because he can just outlast the Ukrainians. And they almost didn't get this aid. And some people are like, it might be too little too late because the Russians are beginning to turn the tide. I don't know. Wars, again, are uncertain things. Who knows where it'll go from here? But those are some of the things to think about. I'm at 13 minutes now because this is something that we could discuss for hours and hours, but we don't have time. You've got a video to watch and some writing to do in your last quiz. And then you're done, except for, of course, the final. So, alrighty, I'll do a farewell message before I make the final available. So, we'll see you then.